The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound keeping me tethered to reality. Tubes snaked from my arms, and a dull ache spread across my chest with every breath. The sterile smell of disinfectant clung to the air, cold and impersonal. I had just made it through a major surgery. 6 hours on the table, 12 in recovery. The surgeons said I was lucky to be alive. But as I blinked up at the dim ceiling of my hospital room, the real pain had nothing to do with the stitches or the medications. It was the silence, the emptiness. No one had come. Not my son, not my daughter, not even my sister, who I used to speak to every single day. My phone remained untouched on the bedside table, the screen dark. Not a single call, not a single message, nothing. They knew I was here. I had made sure of it. I'd left voicemails, sent texts before the surgery, even gave them the hospital room number. I was scared, I'll admit it. Scared I wouldn't make it, scared to be alone. And yet, alone was exactly how they left me. I waited. 1 day, 2. A week passed. Nurses came and went with polite, professional smiles, but no familiar faces ever walked through that door. Not a flower, not a card, not even a hope you're okay. By the time I was discharged, my chest ached more from the abandonment than the sutures. When I finally got home, struggling to climb the stairs with my walker, there was a stack of unopened mail on my kitchen table. My house was untouched, as though my absence hadn't mattered in the slightest. I collapsed into the living room chair and let the tears fall. I had always been the caretaker, the matriarch, the one who showed up. Birthdays, graduations, even minor breakups. I was there with food, support, and unconditional love. But when it was my turn to need someone, they couldn't be bothered. A few weeks later, I sat across from my lawyer, going over the revisions to my will. He looked at me, hesitating before he spoke. "Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said, voice cold as steel. Because that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't always come with shouting matches or slammed doors. Sometimes it's just absence. A phone that never rings. A hospital room that stays empty. But the real punch in the gut. 2 months later, I watched all 3 of them, my son, my daughter, my sister, file into the law office dressed in black, faces pulled into expressions of faux grief. I wasn't even cold in the ground yet, and they were already licking their lips, waiting to hear what I'd left them. The same people who couldn't find a moment to visit me when I was hanging on by a thread suddenly had all the time in the world to sit through a will reading. But oh, I had planned for this. They thought they knew me. They thought I was still the same old pushover, soft-hearted, forgiving, always giving, never asking for anything in return. They were wrong. Dead wrong. I watched their faces change, smiles fading, expressions tightening as the lawyer began to read. Page after page, detail after detail, it unfolded exactly as I had intended. And that, dear reader, is where this story truly begins. You see, betrayal is a quiet kind of death. But revenge is loud. I didn't grow up with much. My parents were factory workers who taught me the value of hard work, sacrifice, and, most of all, family. So when I had my own children, I swore I'd give them everything I never had. And I did. I worked 2 jobs for most of their childhoods, packed lunches with little handwritten notes, showed up for every school play, every parent-teacher conference, even when I had to rush over in scrubs and sore feet. When my sister Marlene's husband left her and she had nowhere to go, I didn't hesitate. I opened up my home. She lived with us for 2 years, rent-free, until she got back on her feet. I lent her money, supported her business, and stood by her side through every breakdown. But the thing about giving people everything is that they start to expect it. Worse, they start to feel entitled to it. My generosity became their baseline. And somewhere along the line, I stopped being a person to them and started being a resource. It started subtly, the way most betrayals do. Missed birthdays. Forgotten calls. My texts started getting one-word replies, or worse, silence. My son Jeremy used to call me every Sunday, like clockwork. After he got that big promotion and moved into the city, the calls slowed to once a month. Then once every few months. Then never. My daughter Elise fared no better. She only ever called when she needed something: babysitting, money for a down payment, help covering a surprise bill. I never said no, even when I wanted to, especially when I couldn't afford to. And Marlene? After she moved out and her business took off, she didn't need me anymore. At least not until she wanted help with the down payment on her new condo. I wrote the check, $10,000, with no contract, no expectation. Just trust. But trust, I've learned, is a dangerous currency. When I collapsed in my kitchen last year, dizzy, breathless, clutching my chest, I thought I was dying. Turns out I was halfway there. A heart condition I never knew I had. Emergency. Surgery. 6 nights in the hospital. And not one of them came. Not even after I got home. Not even when I called. "Oh, I was just so busy, Mom," Elise had said afterward. "You know how things are with the kids." Jeremy texted me 2 weeks later. "Glad you're okay. We'll catch up soon." Marlene didn't even bother with an excuse. And that's when it hit me. Something hard, something bitter. They didn't care. Not really. Not about me. Only about what I could do for them. I was disposable. Replaceable. Forgettable. The only time I saw them again, all together, was at my home, when they caught wind that my health was declining and assumed, like vultures, circling, that the end was near. They started making polite conversation, pretending to care. Elise even brought flowers. Jeremy offered to help with errands, and Marlene smiled too wide. They thought I didn't notice. They thought I was still weak, still desperate for their attention. But I wasn't. I had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done wrong. Too many afternoons crying into the same hands that had once held theirs. I had worn myself out trying to be good enough, loving enough, useful enough. Until I realized something crucial. They weren't the problem. I was. I had taught them how to treat me. I had allowed it. And now, I was the only one who could unteach them. So, while they waited for me to crumble, I was busy putting something else together. Something stronger. Something final. And when it was done, I folded the pages carefully, sealed the envelope, and placed it in the lawyer's hands. "If they want a piece of me," I told him, "they're going to have to listen to every word." This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. It wasn't about a missed phone, call, or forgotten visit. It was about something far deeper, more dangerous. It was about the erosion of everything I had built, my family, my legacy, my very sense of worth. See, people think betrayal is a single moment, a knife in the back, a loud argument, a dramatic walkout. But that's not how it works. Not really. Betrayal is quiet. It's incremental. It starts with one moment of silence, then another, until you're screaming inside and no one even notices. They didn't just abandon me emotionally. They stripped me of dignity. As I recovered from surgery, I realized how vulnerable I truly was. I needed help. Real help. Groceries, rides to appointments, someone to sit beside me when the nights got too long and the fear too loud. And where were they? Gone. Too busy. Too tired. Too distracted. But not too busy to post selfies at brunch. Not too tired to attend parties or vacations. Marlene went on a Caribbean cruise 2 days after I got home from the hospital. Elise hosted a wine night with her friends. The same weekend I had a post-op scare and spent 12 hours in the ER, alone. And Jeremy, he was in Italy. I saw it on Instagram. A full album of sun-drenched villas and cocktails beside infinity pools, all captioned with things like, "Grateful for this beautiful life." Not once did he message me while I was recovering. What did all of this mean? It meant I had poured decades of my life into people who never planned to pour anything back. It meant that when the day finally came that I couldn't take care of myself, I had no one to rely on. Not really. It meant that everything I had worked so hard for, every dollar saved, every sacrifice made, was at risk of ending up in the hands of people who didn't love me. Not truly. Not in the ways that matter. You don't realize how much you've been carrying until you fall, and no one offers to pick you up. And I had carried them all. Their debts, their emotions, their problems. I had excused bad behavior under the guise of family loyalty. I had stayed silent when they dismissed me, disrespected me, discarded me. I told myself it would change, that they would grow up, that I had to be patient. But patience is no substitute for respect. And love, without respect, that's just manipulation dressed up in pretty words. There's something shattering about seeing your own blood, your own flesh, look right through you like you're furniture in a room they've outgrown. And worse still, watching them circle like hyenas, sniffing for what's theirs the moment. They think your time is up. That will reading. Oh, I knew they'd come. I knew the second I closed my eyes for good, they'd crawl out of their holes and dust off their fake tears. Because if there's one thing they cared about more than me, it was money. They assumed they'd get it all. They assumed I hadn't changed a thing. They assumed wrong. You see, it wasn't about revenge for the sake of being petty. This was about justice. It was about ensuring that my legacy, the life I worked for, bled for, wouldn't become their next entitlement. I didn't want my hard-earned estate to fund Jeremy's third luxury car, or Elise's overpriced yoga retreats, or Marlene's next flashy renovation. I wanted it to mean something. I wanted it to go to the people who were there. The nurse, who held my hand during the worst of the pain. The neighbor who brought groceries every week without being asked. The charity that gave free rides to medical appointments when no one else would. They deserved it. Not because of blood, because of loyalty, because of love, because they showed up. And that's what this story is really about. Not revenge for the sake of vengeance, but karma served cold, in silence, with receipts. They thought I'd die quietly. They thought they'd win by default. But they forgot one very important thing. I always finish what I start. I didn't get angry. Not in the way they expected. There were no screaming voicemails, no dramatic ultimatums, just silence, just distance. While they carried on with their lives, blissfully unaware, I was making quiet moves in the background. It started with my will. I'd had one in place for years, basic, traditional, the kind you make when you assume your children will grow into decent adults. Everything split evenly, house, savings, investments. It was simple. Too simple. But now, it needed teeth. My lawyer, Mr. Ridley, had been handling my affairs for nearly a decade. A cautious man, always by the book, but even he raised his eyebrows when I showed him the new distribution. "You're sure about this?" he asked, tapping the edge of the legal pad. "Absolutely." We went over every detail. I removed Jeremy, Elise, and Marlene from the primary asset list. Instead, I left small, symbolic amounts. Amounts that would make a point, not a profit. Jeremy would get the old recliner in the basement, the one he always said was an eyesore I should throw away. Along with it, a $1 and a letter. Elise would receive my worn-out recipe box. She used to complain about how my cooking was too old-fashioned, so I figured it was poetic. Marlene would inherit a framed photo of us from when she first moved in with me, taken before things soured. A reminder, not a reward. But the real plan, the part that made me smile as I recovered in silence, was what I did with the rest. I set up a scholarship fund in my name at the local community college, dedicated to single mothers returning to school. I left a significant amount to the nurse, Angela, who sat with me during my darkest nights in the hospital and treated me like a human being, not just a chart. I donated a portion to Meals on Wheels, the very organization that showed up when my own family didn't. I wrote them a letter too, explaining why it mattered. And the house? That went to my neighbor Sam, a widower in his 60s, who shoveled my driveway after the snowstorm, brought soup when I couldn't get out of bed, and never asked for a thing in return. But I didn't stop there. Rewriting a will is one thing. But I wanted them to hear it. I wanted them to sit in that room, expecting a payout, wearing those practiced expressions of grief, and be served with truth instead. So, I recorded a message. Nothing flashy. Just me, sitting in my living room, calm and collected. "I know why you're here," I began, looking directly into the camera. "You weren't here when it mattered, but you're here now. You came for what you thought you were owed. Let me explain why you're leaving empty-handed." I went on to list the moments they failed, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I talked about the silence, the absence, the way they made me feel like a burden when I needed help the most. I ended the video with a smile. I hope this serves as a reminder that people remember how you treat them when they're at their lowest. That's when character shows. And if you're watching this, well, yours did. Mr. Ridley agreed to play the video during the official reading. And just to ensure there were no legal loopholes, I attached everything with an airtight no contest clause. If they challenged it in court, they'd forfeit even the symbolic scraps. I left nothing to chance. Because this wasn't about being vindictive. It was about taking control. About leaving behind something that actually mattered. Something honest. Something intentional. They had taken for granted the woman I used to be. The giver. The fixer. The quiet one. But the woman they overlooked in that hospital bed, she was gone. And the one who replaced her? She was ready. There's a quiet power in planning while others underestimate you. While they went on with their lives, making assumptions, I moved like a shadow, carefully, deliberately, and always a step ahead. I started by documenting everything. Not just legal paperwork, but personal receipts too. The unanswered texts. The ignored calls. The dates and times I reached out. I printed copies and kept a journal. Not out of pettiness, but clarity. Because memory fades, but paper doesn't lie. Then I requested my full hospital records. Every surgery note, every post-op follow-up, even the admission log from the emergency room. It sounds excessive, maybe, but I wanted a clear, undeniable picture of just how serious my condition had been. I wanted to remember, not just for them, but for me. Proof that I hadn't imagined the silence, that it really was as bad as I remembered. I reviewed my finances next, line by line. I traced every loan I'd ever given Marlene, every transfer I'd sent to Elise, every short-term deposit into Jeremy's business that somehow never came back. I wrote it all down, with dates, amounts, and descriptions. Decades of quiet, giving, laid bare in black and white. Once I had it all, I met with Mr. Ridley again. We drafted airtight clauses. No wiggle room, no he said, she said. If any of them tried to contest the will, they'd receive nothing. If they tried to challenge the trusts, the funds would be redirected to backup charities. I wasn't going to let them bully their way into anything. I also made sure the real beneficiaries knew what was coming. I invited Angela the nurse for coffee one afternoon. She cried when I told her. "No one's ever done something like this for me," she said. "You did something for me," I told her. "You showed up." Same with Sam, my neighbor. I handed him a sealed envelope with instructions for Mr. Ridley. He tried to refuse it. I didn't do any of that expecting. "I know," I said. "That's why you're getting it." I made a spreadsheet, a file folder, a backup folder. I wasn't taking any chances. And then, finally, I turned to my children and sister. Not directly, but digitally. I changed the locks to the house. I updated my power of attorney. I removed them from my emergency contact list at the hospital. I took control back, piece by piece. The final step was setting the date for the will reading. Mr. Ridley scheduled it for the week following my funeral. Invitations were sent. Formal, elegant, with their names printed in gold lettering. No one refused. They were curious, eager, maybe even smug. I imagine they told themselves it was guilt that brought them back, that they'd come to honor my memory. But deep down, I think they knew. I think some part of them felt the shift, like the air had changed and they were no longer in control. That's the thing about people who manipulate with silence. They never expect the quiet ones to strike back, but I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for closure. I wasn't going to yell or argue. I wasn't going to try to make them understand. Because they wouldn't. Not really. Not in the ways that mattered. What I wanted, what I planned, was to show them the cost of their absence, to make them sit with it, hear it, feel it. That's what justice looks like sometimes. Not in grand gestures, but in uncomfortable silences and truths spoken plainly. The pieces were in place. The records documented. The beneficiaries secured. The video cued. Everything was ready. And when they walked into that room expecting a payday, what they got was something else entirely. A reckoning. The conference room was quiet. Too quiet. Jeremy sat near the window, legs crossed, dressed like he'd just come from some executive boardroom. Elise wore black like it was a costume. Marlene arrived last, reeking of too much perfume and entitlement. None of them looked particularly sad. A few forced sighs. Elise dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue that stayed suspiciously dry. They weren't mourning. They were waiting. Mr. Ridley stood at the head of the long mahogany table, fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Before I proceed with the formal reading, there's something your sister, requested you watch." He pressed play. The screen on the wall flickered to life. There I was, sitting in my favorite armchair, calm and collected. I wore a navy sweater, pearls around my neck. My hands were folded neatly in my lap. "I know why you're here," I said, looking directly into the camera. "You came for what you think you're owed. But let me explain something. Inheritance isn't about obligation. It's about intention. And I no longer intend to reward absence." Jeremy shifted in his seat. I continued. "You weren't there when I needed you. You weren't there in the hospital. You weren't there when I came home. You weren't even there when I called. I gave everything I had to this family, my time, my money, my love. And when I needed just a fraction of that in return, silence." Elise looked down. Marlene's jaw clenched. "I want you to know that I didn't make these decisions out of anger," I said. "I made them out of clarity. This isn't punishment, it's recognition. The people who will benefit from my estate are the ones who showed up, the ones who gave, even when they didn't have to, the ones who didn't ask what I could do for them, but asked how I was doing. They're the ones carrying my legacy forward." The screen went black. Silence. Then Mr. Ridley began reading the will aloud. "To my son Jeremy, I leave the leather recliner in the basement and a $1. May it remind you of everything you ignored while chasing more." Jeremy's face flushed. "What the hell is this?" "To my daughter Elise, I leave my recipe box, the one you always found so outdated. May it teach you that love is often found in the little things you once dismissed." Elise's lip trembled, but she said nothing. "To my sister Marlene, I leave the photo of us during better times. May it serve as a mirror, not a memory." Marlene stood up. "Is this a joke? You can't be serious." "Oh, I assure you," Ridley said calmly. "She was very serious." He continued, detailing the full extent of the new will. "The scholarship fund, the donation to Meals on Wheels, the full ownership of the house going to Sam, the cash sum and investment account gifted to Angela, all with names, documents, and sealed letters of thanks." "You've got to be kidding me," Jeremy muttered. "She's giving it all to strangers?" Mr. Ridley looked at him, unblinking. "No. She gave it to the people who were family in action, even if not in blood." And then came the final clause. Should any of the original heirs contest, this will, their share will be forfeited in full and immediately redistributed to secondary beneficiaries. Jeremy opened his mouth, then closed it. Marlene swore under her breath and stormed out. Elise sat quietly, eyes glistening, but with guilt or regret, I'll never know. And just like that, it was done. Everything I had feared, that they'd walk all over me even after I was gone, never came to pass. Instead, I got the last word. Not in anger, not in rage, but in truth. That's the power of closure. It doesn't always come in dramatic confrontations or screaming matches. Sometimes it comes in calm declarations and decisions made with a clear mind and a steady hand. My story didn't end with heartbreak. It ended with justice, with love rewarded, with absence exposed. And as they walked away empty-handed, perhaps, for the first time, they were forced to see me, not as a wallet or a fallback plan, but as a person, a woman who gave, and then finally stopped.